The radio on Officer Marcus Hayes's chest crackled with the static-laced indifference of a city that had long ago surrendered its soul to the gods on the billboards. He ignored it, leaning his weight against the rough brick of a bodega in Hell's Kitchen, staring at the smear of red paste on the asphalt 10 yards away. It used to be a pedestrian. Now it was Collateral Event 7 Alpha. That was the official terminology Vought International required the NYPD to use in the paperwork. Not victim, not manslaughter, an event. Marcus took a drag from a cigarette that tasted like exhaust fumes and defeat. He was 25, 3 years on the force, and he had the eyes of a man waiting for a terminal diagnosis. He adjusted his cap, watching the Vought cleanup crew scrub the street with high-pressure hoses. They wore pristine white coveralls, moving with the efficiency of a pit crew. They were washing away a human being because Shockwave, a speedster, gunning for a spot in the 7, had taken a corner too sharp while chasing a purse snatcher. "You gonna write that up, Hayes?" his partner, intense gray-haired Sergeant Miller, asked, not looking up from his phone. Miller was checking his fantasy superhero league stats. "What's the point, Sarge?" Marcus flicked the ash. "Vought Legal already sent the NDA to the family. They get a check, we get a headache, and Shockwave gets a bump in his Q rating for active engagement. The guy he turned into salsa is just texture. That's the job, kid. We hold the yellow tape, they fly above it. Don't think too hard, it rots your gut." Marcus looked up. The sky above New York was a bruised purple, the light pollution drowning out the stars. High above a massive digital display on the Vought Tower projected the smiling, terrifyingly perfect face of Homelander. The caption read, "Safety is our brand." Marcus hated them. He hated the capes. He hated the masks. He hated the way the public cheered when a soupe threw a car through a building, ignoring the family inside the apartment on the 3rd floor. He believed, with a cold, hard knot in his stomach, that there was no such thing as a hero. There were just celebrities with nukes in their veins, and normal people were just ants waiting for the magnifying glass. Then the air changed. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a pressure drop, sudden and violent, like being in a descending elevator that had its cables cut. The hair on Marcus's arms stood up. The Vought cleanup crew stopped scrubbing. The hum of the city, the traffic, the sirens, the shouting was sucked into a vacuum of impossible silence. Then came the sound. It sounded like the universe tearing a ligament. Krakom. The sky didn't just break. It shattered. Green lightning, thick as a redwood trunk, slammed into the intersection of 42nd and 8th, obliterating a hot dog stand and sending a shockwave that knocked Marcus off his feet. He hit the pavement hard, his ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. The air smelled instantly of ozone and burning sewage. Holy, call it in 10 to 13 explosion at 42nd. Miller was screaming, scrambling for his radio, but the frequency was dead static. Marcus pushed himself up, coughing through a cloud of concrete dust. The street was a disaster zone. Car alarms blared in a discordant symphony. The crater in the middle of the intersection was smoking, glowing with a residual, sickly emerald energy. "Stay back," Miller yelled, drawing his service weapon. "Hayes, establish a perimeter. Get those civilians back." Marcus stumbled forward, his hand resting on the grip of his Glock. It felt like a toy. Whatever made that hole wasn't something a 9mm could fix. The dust began to settle, swirling around a silhouette in the center of the crater. It was big, massive. A hand the size of a canned ham gripped the edge of the asphalt crater. The skin was green, not the sleek costume green of the deep, but a rough reptilian biological green. A dorsal fin, sharp and serrated, cut through the smoke as the figure hauled itself up. Marcus froze. He had seen soups before. He'd seen the engineered perfection of Queen Maeve and the sleek armor of Black Noir. This was different. This looked raw, primal. The figure stood up. He was naked, towering nearly 7 feet tall, with a barrel chest that looked like it could stop a tank shell. He shook his head, a massive fin crowning his skull, and coughed, spitting out a glob of green blood. "Freeze," Miller shouted, his voice cracking. "NYPD, get on the ground." The green giant blinked, looking around with eyes that weren't glowing red or white, but were confused and shockingly human. He looked at Miller, then at Marcus, then down at his own green hands. "NYPD." The giant's voice was a deep rumble like rocks tumbling in a dryer. He sounded groggy. This ain't Chicago." "I said get on the ground, motherfucker." Miller was panicking. In this world, unknown. Supes were terrorists until Vought said otherwise. Miller fired a warning shot into the pavement. The giant flinched, not out of fear, but annoyance. "Easy, pal. Put the piece away. I'm an officer. Lieutenant Dragon, Chicago PD." Marcus stared. A green monster buck naked in a crater claiming to be a cop. It was absurd. It was terrifying. "Bullshit," Miller yelled. "Dispatch, we have a hostile soupy level 4 threat. We need backup." "I ain't hostile," the giant dragon growled, stepping out of the hole. He looked down at a burning taxicab. The driver was trapped inside, screaming, the door jammed against the buckled street. Without hesitating, Dragon ignored the guns pointed at him. He walked to the cab. "Hey, stop moving," Miller shouted. Dragon didn't even look back. He grabbed the driver's side door of the taxi. With a grunt of exertion, the muscles in his back bunching like coiled steel cables, he ripped the door off its hinges as if he were opening a bag of chips. He tossed the metal aside, reached in, and gently, implausibly gently pulled the bleeding driver out. "You're all right, buddy," Dragon said, his voice dropping to a comforting baritone. "Paramedics will be here soon. Keep pressure on that leg." Marcus lowered his gun slightly. The cognitive dissonance was making him dizzy. Supes didn't do that. Supes didn't get their hands dirty unless there was a camera. Supes didn't comfort the victim. They posed next to the wreckage. This thing, this creature, looked like a nightmare, but he moved like a first responder. "Hayes, keep your weapon on him," Miller barked. Suddenly, the wind picked up again. A rhythmic thwup, thwup, thwup echoed off the skyscrapers. Black helicopters with the Vought logo swarmed over the skyline. Spotlights pinned Dragon to the pavement. "Attention," an amplified voice boomed from the lead chopper. "Unknown entity. Surrender to Vought security immediately. Resistance will be met with lethal force." Dragon looked up, shielding his eyes. "Vought? Who the hell is Vought?" "You're in deep shit now," Marcus whispered, stepping closer despite himself. "Big guy, just do what they say. They don't take prisoners." Dragon looked at Marcus. For a second, the two cops locked eyes. Marcus saw something he hadn't seen in years, genuine concern. Not for himself, but for the situation. "I didn't break any laws, kid," Dragon said. "I woke up in a hole. Where I come from, you don't shoot a guy for falling down." "This isn't where you come from," Marcus replied, his voice shaking. A figure dropped from the lead helicopter, landing on the pavement with a cracked spiderweb of impact. It wasn't Homelander, it was Black Noir. Silent, imposing a void in the shape of a man. He stood up, unsheathed 2 combat knives, and tilted his head at Dragon. "Oh, great," Dragon muttered, cracking his neck. "A ninja. I hate ninjas." "Stand down," Marcus yelled, suddenly stepping between Dragon and Black Noir. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was the way Dragon saved the cabbie. Maybe it was the sheer exhaustion of watching Vought run the world. He's securing a victim. He's compliant. Black Noir didn't acknowledge Marcus. He simply backhanded the young officer. The blow wasn't full strength. If it had been, Marcus would be headless, but it was enough to send him flying 20 feet into a parked cruiser. Marcus hit the windshield glass, shattering ribs, cracking his world, turning into a kaleidoscope of pain and darkness. He slid down the hood, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Through the haze of pain, Marcus watched. Dragon roared. It wasn't a roar of dominance. It was the roar of a partner seeing an officer down. "He's a cop, you little spook," Dragon shouted. Dragon charged. He moved faster than a creature that size had any right to. Black Noir, usually the fastest thing in the room, barely had time to raise his blades. Dragon didn't use karate. He didn't use lasers. He used a shoulder check that hit Noir like a runaway freight train. Noir flew backwards, skipping off the asphalt like a stone on a pond, crashing through the storefront of a Starbucks. The Vought security teams on the ground opened fire. High-caliber rounds pinged off Dragon's green skin like hail on a tin roof. He didn't bleed. He didn't slow down. He grabbed the front bumper of a police cruiser, lifted the entire car over his head, and slammed it down to create a barricade between the shooters and the injured Marcus Hayes. Dragon knelt behind the car, shielding Marcus's broken body with his own massive bulk. Bullets whined overhead. "You okay, kid?" Dragon asked, checking Marcus's pupils. You hit Noir." Marcus wheezed, blood bubbling on his lips. "Nobody hits Noir. Guy hits a cop. He gets put down." "That's the rule," Dragon grunted. He looked at the chaos around them, the Vought kill squads, the silent assassin, recovering in the coffee shop, the terrified civilians. Dragon looked at the "Safety is our brand" billboard above them, then back at the Vought paramilitaries shooting at a wounded officer. He frowned, his fin twitching. "I don't know where I am," Dragon growled, his eyes narrowing, "but I know a gang war when I see one, and it looks like the bad guys have the badges here." What if the world's greatest heroes were actually its worst nightmares? And what if the only thing that could stop them was a monster with a badge? Dragon stood up, rising above the barricade. He didn't look like a superhero. He looked like a riot. "All right," Dragon bellowed, his voice drowning out the gunfire. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you do can and will be used against you in a court of law or by me personally." He ripped a parking meter out of the concrete, swinging it like a baseball bat. Marcus Hayes, vision blurring, watched the green giant wade into the Vought security team. For the first time in 3 years, watching a soupy fight didn't make him feel small. It made him feel protected. And that terrified him more than anything, because in this city, hope was just the setup for the punchline. The battle didn't last long, but it was loud. Dragon fought with a brawler's efficiency. He wasn't trying to kill the Vought security guards. He was disarming them, violently. Guns were bent into pretzels. Kevlar vests were used as handles to toss men into dumpsters. Black Noir re-emerged from the Starbucks, shaking off debris. He paused, analyzing Dragon. The 7 rarely encountered brute strength that matched their own. Noir signaled to the chopper. They were pulling back, not retreating, regrouping. This was an anomaly. Vought PR needed a narrative before Vought Ops could execute a kill. The choppers pulled up. The gunfire ceased. The silence that followed was heavy. Dragon stood amidst the wreckage, chest heaving, holding the twisted remains of a parking meter. He looked around at the destruction, then down at Marcus, who was trying to stand up despite his ribs screaming in protest. Dragon extended a massive green hand. Marcus hesitated. He looked at the hand. It was an alien hand, a monster's hand, but the palm was open. "Name's Dragon," the giant said. Officer Hayes. Marcus whispered, gripping the thick green fingers. He was pulled to his feet with effortless stability. "Well, Officer Hayes," Dragon said, looking up at the Homelander billboard, his expression grim. You mind telling me why the local SWAT team is sponsored by a pharmaceutical company and why everyone looks at me like I'm the devil, but looks at that plastic Ken doll up there like he's Jesus? Marcus spat blood onto the pavement. The pain in his chest was sharp, but his mind was clearing. The cynicism was still there, but a crack had formed in the ice. It's a long story, Dragon Marcus said, and we need to get off the street before the big guns show up. You just declared war on God. Dragon snorted, picking a flattened bullet out of his pectoral muscle and flicking it away. God, Dragon scowled. I've met God. He doesn't wear a cape. As sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the arrival of the real NYPD backup, who would undoubtedly arrest them both. Marcus realized his life was over. His career was dead. He was an accomplice to a terrorist event. But as he looked at the green fin cutting a silhouette against the burning city lights, Marcus realized something else. For the first time, he wasn't just a witness. He was a partner. The subterranean bowels of New York City didn't smell like crime. They smelled like old rust and stagnant choices. Marcus Hayes limped along the service catwalk of an abandoned subway line, the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of leaking pipes serving as a metronome for his throbbing headache. Every step sent a spike of agony through his cracked ribs, a jagged reminder of Black Noir's backhand. Behind him, the heavy, wet footsteps of Lieutenant Dragon echoed like thunder rolling in a canyon. The giant had to hunch over to avoid scraping his fin on the low-hanging conduit pipes. In the dim, flickering amber of the emergency lights, his green skin looked almost black slick with the grime of the city above. We should have gone to the precinct. Dragon grumbled, his voice reverberating off the tiled walls. I need to file a report. I need to call Chicago. My captain is going to have my badge for this. Marcus stopped, leaning against a rusted railing to catch his breath. He laughed, a wet, hacking sound that tasted of copper. You don't get it, do you? Marcus wheezed, turning to face the monster who had saved his life. There is no Chicago, not the one you know. And the precinct, that's just a holding cell until Vought decides who gets to disappear. You walk in there, you don't walk out. You end up in a lab dissected by guys in white coats who want to know why your skin stops bullets. Dragon frowned, the ridges above his eyes deepening. He looked at his own hands, then at the tech-heavy utility belt. He still wore the only piece of equipment that had traveled with him. You keep saying that name. Vought. They run the cops. They run everything, Marcus whispered. Pharmaceuticals, defense contracts, media, movies, religion. The supes, the heroes, they're just the mascot division. And you just punched their favorite mute ninja through a Starbucks. Dragon leaned against a concrete pillar, the structure groaning under his weight. He crossed his massive arms. So, I'm a fugitive for doing my job. You're not a fugitive, Marcus said, staring into the dark tunnel ahead. You're a product recall, an unauthorized variable. Dragon was about to respond when his head snapped to the right. His fin twitched. Quiet. I didn't hear. I said quiet. Dragon's eyes narrowed. He sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring. Ozone, stale beer, and gun oil. Lots of it. From the shadows further down the tunnel, a laser dot danced across Marcus's chest, then another on his forehead, then 3 more on Dragon's chest. Well, 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 a voice rasped from the darkness. It was a voice like gravel in a blender, thick with a Cockney accent that dripped with disdain. Look what the sewer dragged in, a copper and a gecko. Usually I'd kill you both just to save the oxygen, but I'm feeling charitable. A man stepped into the pool of amber light. He wore a long black trench coat, combat boots, and a shirt with a tropical pattern that screamed of a man who didn't care what day it was. He held a high-caliber sniper rifle casually over his shoulder. Behind him emerged three others, a tall, broad-shouldered black man with a look of perpetual worry, mother's milk, a skinny, nervous kid who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else Huey, and a mute, savage-looking woman with wild hair, Kimiko. Marcus instinctively reached for his holster, but his hand froze. He knew these faces. They were on every Vought most wanted list in the tri-state area. The boys Marcus breathed Billy Butcher. Fans Butcher sneered, spitting on the tracks. Can't stand 'em. He turned his gaze to Dragon. Butcher didn't look impressed. He looked calculating. He looked like a butcher inspecting a side of beef. You're the one who clocked Noir, Butcher said, stepping closer, ignoring the sheer size of the green behemoth. Saw it on the police scanner feed. Nice right hook. A bit sloppy on the follow-through, but effective. Who are you, Dragon asked, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't like the way this man looked at him. It wasn't fear, it was appraisal. I'm the guy who's gonna stop you from getting your green arse turned into a pair of boots. For Homelander, Butcher said. Name's Butcher, we kill soups. And you, mate, you're a soupa. Dragon bristled. I'm a police officer. You're a freak of nature, Butcher corrected, lighting a cigarette. The flame illuminated the hard lines of his face. And right now, Vought is spinning the narrative upstairs. You ain't a cop. According to VNN, you're an eco-terrorist bioweapon, unleashed by a radical anti-American cell. Homelander is already giving a press conference, tears in his eyes, promising to protect the Heartland from the alien menace. Dragon looked at Marcus for confirmation. Marcus pulled out his cracked smartphone and tapped the screen. He held it up. On the screen, Homelander stood at a podium, the American flag billowing behind him on a giant digital display. He looked devastated, his perfect face a mask of patriotic sorrow. We welcome all, Homelander said smoothly, his voice modulated to trigger maximum empathy. But when monsters come to our streets, when they hurt our brave men and women in uniform, when they attack heroes like Black Noir, we must draw a line. This dragon is not human. He does not share our values. He is a beast. And I promise you, I will put him down. Dragon watched the screen, his jaw tightening until a vein pulsed in his neck. He saw the lies. He saw the performance. He's lying, Dragon growled. He's Homelander, Huey piped up from the back, his voice shaky. That's kind of his thing. So here's the deal, Butcher said, blowing smoke into Dragon's face. You come with us. We got a secure location. We debrief. We figure out how hard you can hit. Maybe we use you to crack a few skulls before Vought vaporizes you. Dragon stared at Butcher. He looked at the ragtag group of vigilantes. Then he looked at Marcus. Officer Hayes, Dragon said formally. Are these criminals? Marcus hesitated. This was the moment, the crossover point. He was a cop. He took an oath. Butcher was a murderer, a terrorist by every legal definition. But Marcus looked at the phone screen again, at Homelander's perfect lying smile. Technically, yes, Marcus said, but in this world, Dragon, the laws are written by the bad guys. Dragon processed this. He was a man of the law. Order was his religion, but he wasn't stupid. He knew a frame-up when he saw one. I don't work with skells, Dragon said to Butcher, crossing his arms again, but I need intel. I need to know the lay of the land, so I'll walk with you. But if you cross me, if I see you hurt an innocent, I'll fold you in half. Butcher grinned. It was a shark's grin. I like him. He's got spunk. Right then, take point. Huey, stop shaking. You're rattling the pipes. Let's move before. Boom. The ceiling of the tunnel 50 yards back imploded. Debris rained down, crushing the catwalk they had just been standing on. Dust billowed out in a choking cloud. Through the hole in the ceiling, a figure descended, floating gently on a column of air. It wasn't Homelander, it was Stormfront. She hovered in the air, electricity crackling purple around her fingertips. Her social media live stream drone hovered over her shoulder, the red recording light blinking. "Hey guys," Stormfront shouted, her voice bright and cheery for her followers watching at home. "Found the ugly green bastard, and look, he's hanging out with the terrorists. Vought rising alien invader." She looked down at the group, her eyes glowing with plasma energy. "Oh, and you found Butcher too, for one. This is gonna be great content." "Run," Butcher yelled, raising his rifle and firing a high-explosive round. The bullet struck Stormfront in the chest, exploding in a flash of light. She didn't even flinch. She just laughed a cruel, manic sound. "That tickles Billy." She unleashed a bolt of lightning. It wasn't a precision strike, it was a wave of destruction. It tore through the tunnel, ripping up tracks, shattering concrete. Dragon didn't run. He grabbed Marcus and Huey, the two most fragile humans in the blast zone, and threw them behind a thick concrete support pillar. He turned his back to the blast, curling his massive body around them. The lightning hit Dragon square in the back. ZZZZZKRAK. The smell of burning ozone was overwhelming. Dragon roared in pain as the electricity coursed through him, frying his nerves, cooking his skin, but he didn't move. He held his ground, acting as a living shield. Marcus pressed against the cold concrete, looked up into Dragon's face. The giant's teeth were gritted, his eyes shut tight, smoke rising from his shoulders. "Go!" Dragon yelled over the roar of the electricity. "Get them out of here." "We're not leaving you," Huey screamed, surprisingly brave in the moment. "I can take it," Dragon bellowed. "Go!" Kimiko was already moving. She scrambled up the wall like a spider, leaping toward Stormfront with claws bared. Stormfront swatted her away with a telekinetic backhand, sending Kimiko smashing into the tunnel wall. "Filthy little rat," Stormfront sneered. But the distraction was enough. Dragon let go of Marcus and Huey. He turned around. His back was scorched black smoke trailing from his fin, but as Marcus watched, he saw the green skin knitting itself back together. The burns were fading. The regeneration factor. Dragon looked up at the floating Nazi powerhouse. He wasn't afraid. He was pissed. "Hey, Sparky," Dragon shouted. Stormfront looked down, tilting her head. "Oh, can it talk? I thought it just grunted." Dragon bent his knees. The concrete beneath his feet cracked under the pressure. "I have the right to remain violent." Dragon launched himself. He didn't fly, he jumped. He jumped with the force of a hydraulic piston. He rocketed 30 feet into the air, closing the distance before Stormfront's drone could even track him. He slammed into her midair. The impact was seismic. Dragon grabbed Stormfront by her cape and her throat, and the momentum carried them both upward, back through the hole she had made and up into the streets of Manhattan. Grab the kid. Let's go." Butcher ordered, grabbing Marcus by the collar of his uniform. "Big Green just bought us a window. Don't waste it." Marcus stumbled after them, looking back at the hole in the ceiling where the battle had moved to the surface. He could hear the crashes, the screams of the crowd, above the thunder of impacts. He realized then that Dragon wasn't just a tough cop. He was the only thing on the planet that didn't care about the script. As they ran deeper into the dark, Marcus felt a shift in his own soul. The fear was still there, cold and heavy, but for the first time the anger was stronger. "Where are we going?" Marcus gasped, running alongside Butcher. "Safe house," Butcher grunted. "We need heavy ordnance. If your mate survives, he's gonna need a drink. If he doesn't, well, at least he gave Stormfront a bloody nose." "He'll survive," Marcus said, the conviction surprising him. "He heals. I saw it." Butcher glanced at Marcus, raising an eyebrow. "Heals, does he? Interesting. Very interesting." The street above, Dragon and Stormfront crashed onto the pavement of 8th Avenue, tumbling through a bus stop shelter. Glass shattered. Civilians screamed and scattered phones out, recording the chaos. Stormfront kicked Dragon off her, blasting him with another wave of lightning that sent him skidding across the asphalt, carving a trench with his heels. Dragon stood up, shaking off the sparks. His uniform, or lack thereof, was a problem, but the dust and debris gave him some cover. He looked around. He was surrounded, not by police, by fans. People were cheering, but they were cheering for her. "Get him, Stormfront," a guy in a Homelander t-shirt yelled. "Fried lizard." Dragon looked at the crowd. They wanted blood. They wanted a show. Stormfront floated back up, her eyes glowing, her smile perfect for the drone hovering nearby. "You hear that, monster?" she taunted. "They love me. You're just the villain of the week. Time to get cancelled." Dragon spat a glob of green blood onto the street. He cracked his knuckles. Lady Dragon growled, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I don't care about your ratings. I'm just here to take out the trash." He grabbed a manhole cover from the street, wielding it like a discus. The fight was just beginning, and for the first time in the history of Vought, the villain wasn't reading the cue cards. The intersection of 8th Avenue and 42nd Street had ceased to be a thoroughfare. It was now a coliseum, and the audience was baying for blood. Dragon tucked his chin, taking the brunt of a plasma blast that felt like being hit by a freight train made of lava. He slid backward, his bare feet carving deep furrows through the asphalt, sparks flying as his heels ground against the street. The smell of his own cooking flesh was acrid and immediate, filling his nose before the pain even registered. "Come on, you big green turd," a voice screamed from the sidewalk. A glass bottle shattered against Dragon's shoulder, spraying beer over his burning skin. Dragon blinked, clearing the smoke from his eyes. He looked at the thrower, a teenager in a hoodie phone, raised high, live-streaming the assault. The kid wasn't scared. He was excited. He was participating in the event. "I'm trying to help you," Dragon roared, his voice cracking with frustration. He gestured to the crumbling facade of the H&M store behind them, where a structural support had been sheared off by Stormfront's erratic fire. "Get back, the building is unstable." "You're the unstable one," the kid yelled back, emboldened by the hovering presence of Stormfront. Stormfront laughed, floating 20 feet above the carnage. The purple electricity arcing around her body made her look like a wrathful goddess. She played to the cameras, posing, ensuring her best angle was captured by the Vought news drones circling like vultures. "Aw, look at him," she cooed, her voice amplified by the drone speakers. "He's trying to pretend he cares. It's almost cute, like a monkey wearing a suit." She snapped her fingers. A bolt of lightning lashed out, not at Dragon, but at a fire escape filled with onlookers. It was a calculation. A cold, cynical math. If the fire escape fell, Dragon would try to catch it. The metal groaned, bolts shearing with a sound like gunshots. The iron structure peeled away from the brickwork, tilting precariously over the screaming crowd. Dragon didn't think. He didn't weigh the tactical disadvantage. He moved. He launched himself across the street, a green blur of muscle and momentum. He caught the falling fire escape with one hand, his shoulder wrenching audibly under the multi-ton weight. His feet cracked the pavement as he braced himself, holding the structure aloft, shielding the people beneath it. "Go!" He grunted, the veins in his neck bulging like ropes. "Get out of here!" The civilians scrambled away, but they didn't thank him. They ran, looking back in terror, not at the falling metal, but at the monster holding it. Predictable Stormfront sneered. She dropped from the sky, landing on top of the fire escape Dragon was holding. Her added weight and the kinetic force of her landing drove Dragon to his knees. The metal girders dug into his palms. She leaned down, her face inches from his, her eyes glowing with hate. "You don't get it, do you, eco-freak?" she whispered too low for the microphones. "They don't want a hero, they want a winner, and you look like a loser." She placed her hands on the metal grating. Electricity surged through the fire escape, turning the entire structure into a massive conductive coil. Dragon screamed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. The voltage locked his muscles, seizing his entire nervous system. He couldn't let go. He was the ground wire, his green skin blackened, smoke pouring from his ears, his eyes rolling back in his head. The getaway van. "Turn around," Marcus Hayes said. He was sitting in the back of a stolen flower delivery van, huddled between boxes of tulips and a rack of assault rifles. He was watching the live stream on Huey's phone. The screen showed Dragon knees, buckled, smoke rising from his body being cooked alive, while the crowd cheered. Billy Butcher was in the driver's seat, navigating the alleyways with a recklessness that suggested he hated the transmission as much as he hated soups. "Not a chance, Sunshine," Butcher called back, glancing in the rearview mirror. "We got the intel. We know the target exists. Mission accomplished. We live to fight another day." "He's dying," Marcus shouted, the desperation clawing at his throat. "He saved us. He took the hit in the tunnel so we could run." "He's a soupy mother's milk said from the passenger seat, though his voice lacked conviction. He was watching the feed on his own tablet, his brow furrowed. "Butcher's right. It's suicide to go back there. Stormfront is level 7. We're outgunned." "He's a cop." Marcus slammed his hand against the wall of the van, knocking over a box of tulips. "Look at him. He's not fighting back because he's holding up the fire escape. He's protecting the people who are throwing bottles at him." Marcus scrambled forward, grabbing the back of Butcher's seat. His ribs screamed in protest, but the adrenaline masked the pain. "You say you hate them because they're fake," Marcus hissed, staring at the side of Butcher's face. "You say they're products, narcissists, sociopaths. Well, look at that screen. That is a man dying because he refuses to let go of a structure that would crush a dozen people. If you leave him there, you're not fighting the power. You're just letting the only decent thing in this city get murdered by a Nazi bitch." Butcher slammed on the brakes. The van skidded to a halt in a pile of garbage bags behind a Chinese restaurant. Silence filled the cab. Frenchie, sitting in the back with his chemistry set, looked up. Kimiko tilted her head, her eyes dark and unreadable. Butcher turned around slowly. His eyes were hard, but the smirk was gone. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him for the first time. He saw the badge still clipped to Marcus's torn uniform. He saw the blood on his teeth. He saw the same fire that burned in his own gut. "A Nazi bitch, is she?" Butcher mused. "You got a sharp tongue for a Roser." "He's right," Butcher Huey said, his voice small but firm. "Stormfront. She's enjoying it too much. And Dragon didn't attack us. He saved me." Butcher tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. Tap, tap, tap. Frenchie Butcher barked. "Oui, Butcher. That little cocktail you were mixing for Lamplighter. The halothane B derivative. How much you got?" Frenchie held up a glass vial filled with a swirling gray gas, enough to knock out a rhinoceros or a very large, very angry green man. And the RPG, loaded sighed, checking the chamber. "But Butcher, if we do this, we are declaring open war in Times Square. Vought will bring the hammer down." "Good." Butcher grinned, shifting the van into reverse. "I've always wanted to smash a few windows." He looked at Marcus. Hold on to your knickers, Officer Hayes. We're going back to the circus. The Coliseum. Dragon's vision was tunneling. The world was reducing to a blur of purple light and pain. He could feel his heart stuttering, the electrical current disrupting his natural rhythm. Let go, a voice in his head whispered, drop the metal, smash the little ants, crush the witch. But he couldn't. It wasn't in the code. Die already, Stormfront shrieked, increasing the voltage. Why won't you die? Suddenly, a screech of tires cut through the roar of the crowd. The flower van burst out of an alleyway, catching air as it jumped the curb. It plowed through a kiosk selling Homelander Loves You plushies and drifted sideways, coming to a halt 30 yards from the fight. The back doors flew open. Oi, Stormfront Butcher stood in the doorway, an RPG resting on his shoulder. Why don't you pick on someone your own mental age, like a toddler with a toaster? Stormfront looked up distracted. Butcher, you actually came back. You sentimental old... Whoosh! The rocket didn't aim for Stormfront. It aimed for the base of the fire escape she was standing on, specifically the connection point Dragon was holding. The explosion severed the metal girders. Dragon, suddenly relieved of the connection to the building and the ground wire effect, fell backward, still clutching the detached section of the fire escape. Stormfront lost her footing, tumbling into the air. Frenchie now, Butcher yelled. Frenchie stepped up, loading a specialized canister into a grenade launcher. He fired. The canister arced over the street and detonated directly in Dragon's face. A cloud of thick gray gas enveloped the giant. Dragon coughed the gas, filling his massive lungs instantly. It wasn't poison. It was a localized tranquilizer, concentrated enough to drop a whale. His limbs felt like lead. The pain receded, replaced by a heavy, drowning numbness. He tried to stand, but his legs were rubber. Kimiko grabbed the big lug. Kimiko leapt from the van. She was small, but her strength was deceptive. She didn't try to carry Dragon. She grabbed his ankle and dragged him. With a grunt of effort, utilizing the slick asphalt, she hauled the semi-conscious 400-pound giant toward the open doors of the van. The Stormfront righted herself in the air, her eyes blazing white-hot. No. She gathered a ball of plasma the size of a beach ball. She was going to vaporize the van and everyone in it. Marcus Hayes stepped out of the van. He didn't have a rocket launcher. He didn't have powers. He had his service pistol, a Glock 17, completely useless against a soupy. He aimed not at Stormfront, but at the drone hovering 5 feet from her face. Bang! The bullet shattered the camera lens. The feed went dead. For a split second, Stormfront froze. The narcissist in her panicked. She was offline. The show was interrupted. That split second was enough. M.M. and Huey hauled Dragon's upper body into the van. Kimiko jumped in. Marcus dove onto the floorboards as Butcher floored the accelerator. Stormfront's blast hit the pavement where the van had been a second ago, blowing a 10-foot crater in the street. The van careened around the corner, hubcaps flying, disappearing into the labyrinth of New York traffic. The safe house, 2 hours later. The basement of the pawn shop in the Bronx smelled of cat litter and gun oil. It was cramped, damp, and the only place Vought satellites couldn't penetrate, thanks to the lead lining in the walls. Dragon lay on a reinforced steel table, his breathing heavy and rattling. His skin was a map of burns and bruises, but already the black char was flaking off, revealing fresh green scales underneath. Marcus sat on a crate nearby, a bandage wrapped around his head, holding an ice pack to his ribs. He watched the giant sleep. Butcher stood over Dragon, cleaning a knife. He looked at the creature with a mixture of suspicion and greed. Regenerative factor is off the charts, Butcher muttered. He took enough volts to power Vegas for a night, and he's already knitting. Tough bastard. He's a person, Marcus said quietly. Stop talking about him like he's a piece of hardware. Butcher turned, pointing the knife at Marcus. Don't get confused, mate. He's a weapon we just stole from Vought. And if we aim him right, he might just put a dent in Homelander. He's not going to kill for you, Marcus said, meeting Butcher's gaze. He's a cop, a by-the-book Boy Scout cop. He believes in the law. The law, Butcher laughed, a harsh, barking sound. The law is a fairy tale we tell children so they sleep at night. There is no law, there's just the powerful and the dead. Your mate is about to wake up to that reality. On the table, Dragon stirred. His eyes opened. They weren't groggy, they were instantly alert. He sat up, the steel table groaning. He looked at his hands, healed but scarred. He looked at the dank basement. He looked at Butcher, then at Marcus. Where are we? Dragon rumbled. Safe, Marcus said quickly, standing up. We're underground. Vought can't track us here. Dragon rubbed his face. The people on the street. Did they get out? Yeah, Huey said from the corner, offering a bottle of water. They got out. You held the stairs long enough. Dragon took the water. The bottle looked like a thimble in his hand. He crushed it in one swallow. They hated me, Dragon said softly. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. I was saving them and they hated me. Welcome to the 21st century, Butcher said, leaning against the wall. Vought owns the narrative. You're the villain sunshine, the monster under the bed. You could save a burning orphanage and VNN would say you were trying to barbecue the tots. Dragon looked at Butcher. The hostility was still there, but it was tempered by exhaustion. So what now? Dragon asked. I can't go to the police. I can't go outside without starting a riot. Now Butcher smiled, and it was the most dangerous smile Dragon had ever seen. Now we stop playing nice. You want justice, real justice. You won't find it in a courtroom. You find it at the end of a crowbar. Dragon looked at Marcus. He was looking for the counter-argument. He was looking for the good cop to tell him this was wrong. But Marcus just looked down at his own badge, the badge of a police force that had left him to die, that took orders from a corporation that covered up murders. Marcus unpinned the badge from his shirt. He looked at it for a long moment, the silver glinting in the low light. Then he placed it on the table next to Dragon's hand. He's right, Dragon. Marcus whispered the words tasting like ash. The badge. It doesn't mean anything here. Not anymore. Dragon stared at the badge, the symbol of everything he believed in. In his world, it meant protection, order, decency. Here it was just a piece of tin owned by a monster in a cape. Dragon picked up the badge. He closed his fist around it. The metal crumpled like foil. I need clothes, Dragon said, his voice hard as granite, and I need to know where Vought keeps its records. Butcher's smile widened. Music to my ears, mate, music to my ears. The air in the safe house was thick enough to chew. It was a cocktail of stale cigarette smoke, the metallic tang of weapon-cleaning solvents, and the distinct earthy musk of a reptile house. Marcus Hayes sat on a plastic crate, watching Mother's Milk attempt to solve the logistical nightmare of clothing a 7-foot, 400-pound amphibious humanoid. The absurdity of it would have made him laugh a week ago. Now it just felt like Tuesday. It's not gonna fit, Huey said, pinching the bridge of his nose. He was holding up a Vought-branded black noir tactical vest size XXXL. He's got a chest like a wine barrel. You're gonna cut off his circulation. We ain't got a big and tall for mutants. Store around the corner. Huey grunted, stretching the Kevlar straps to their breaking point. He needs armor. He's tough, but he ain't invincible. We saw that with the electricity. Dragon stood in the center of the room, patient but clearly feeling undignified. He was currently wearing a tarp wrapped around his waist like a kilt. He looked like a barbarian king waiting for his armor, except the armor was being cobbled together from stolen SWAT gear and duct tape. "I usually wear a shirt," Dragon rumbled, looking down at the frantic tailoring. "Spandex blend, breathable." "Yeah, well, unless you want to squeeze into one of Frenchie's stripy numbers, you're out of luck," Butcher called out from the corner. He was loading magazines for an M4 carbine, the metallic click-clack distinct and rhythmic. "Besides, you ain't a superhero anymore, mate. You're an insurgent. Dress the part." Frenchie emerged from the back room triumphantly, holding a pair of massive, industrial-grade gray cargo pants. "From the construction site next door for the guy who mixes the cement. They are enormous." Dragon took the pants. He stepped into them. They were snug, hugging his massive thighs, but they buttoned. He nodded, satisfied. MM managed to rig 2 tactical vests together, creating a makeshift chest rig that covered Dragon's vitals while leaving his massive arms free. When Dragon was finally geared up, he looked terrifying. The military drab contrasted sharply with his emerald skin and the serrated fin on his head. He looked like a warlord from a swamp planet. He checked the movement of his arms, the air displacing with a whoosh as he threw a test jab. "Good," Dragon said. He turned to the table where the weapons were laid out. He bypassed the assault rifles and the grenades. He picked up a modified riot shield reinforced by Frenchie with scrap plating from a Vought drone and a heavy stun baton. "That's it," Butcher sneered. "We're hitting a Vought black site, not breaking up a bar fight. Take the .50 caliber." "I don't shoot to kill unless I have to," Dragon said, attaching the baton to his belt. "And I don't use guns on soft targets." "Soft targets," Marcus spoke up, his voice hoarse. "Dragon, these are Vought security. They're private military contractors. They have orders to liquidate us on sight." Dragon looked at Marcus. The giant's eyes were soft, despite the jagged brow. "Officer Hayes." "Marcus, I know you're scared. I know the rules here are broken, but I'm not. If I start slaughtering guards who are just punching a clock, I'm no better than the guy in the cape. I use necessary force, excessive maybe, but necessary." Butcher spat on the floor. "Suit yourself, Gandhi. Just don't come crying to me when a security guard melts your face off with a laser rifle." Butcher stood up, racking the slide of his rifle. He walked to the center of the room, spreading a blueprint out on the table. "Right. Listen up. The target is the Vought Wellness Center in Queens. On paper, it's a rehab clinic for B-list soups who got hooked on Compound V or caught with a dead hooker. In reality, it's a holding pen, a data hub." Butcher stabbed a finger at the map. "We need intel. Dragon wants to know how he got here. Vought tracks interdimensional spikes. They call them breach events. If they have data on where you came from, it's on the server in the basement. We go in, we grab the hard drives, we leave. Quietly. And if it gets loud, Kimiko signed Frenchie translating. Then we let the dragon off the leash," Butcher grinned. The infiltration. The van ride to Queens was tense. The city outside the blackened windows was on edge. Police sirens were constant. The news radio was a continuous loop of Homelander demanding justice for the alien attack and the terrorist Butcher. Marcus sat next to Dragon. The sheer heat radiating off the giant's body was immense. "You really think you can do this the right way?" Marcus whispered. Dragon looked at his hands that could crush a car engine. "The right way is the only way that sticks, kid. You take shortcuts, you owe debts. I've fought freaks, mutants, mafia dons, and literal demons. The ones who try to be judge, jury, and executioner, they always end up the villain." "Butcher seems to be doing okay," Marcus countered. "Butcher is a walking suicide note," Dragon said bluntly. "He doesn't want to win, he wants to burn. There's a difference." The van slowed. They were parked in an alley 2 blocks from the wellness center. It looked like a high-end private hospital, glass steel manicured hedges, but the perimeter fence was 12 feet high and electrified. "You're up," Hayes Butcher said. "Time to earn your keep." Marcus took a deep breath. He put on a generic Vought security cap and a windbreaker. He grabbed a clipboard. This was the plan. It was thin, but it relied on the one thing Vought respected: bureaucracy. Marcus walked up to the side gate. There was a camera and an intercom. He pressed the buzzer. "Delivery for Unit 4. Marcus said, his voice steady despite his heart hammering against his cracked ribs. "Bio-waste disposal. Requesting access to the loading bay. Authorization code Alpha Septini Divini." He used an old code from his precinct days, a code for high-priority crime scene cleanup. It shouldn't work for a secret facility. Code unrecognized. The voice on the intercom crackled. "Step away from the gate." Marcus didn't flinch. "Check the secondary log, genius. We were rerouted from Tower 1 because of the Dragon incident. The grid is messed up. If you want me to leave these barrels of Class A hazardous biomatter on the sidewalk where the press can sniff them, be my guest. I'm sure Mr. Edgar will love the headline." There was a long pause. The threat of a PR disaster was Vought's kryptonite. "Hold on," the voice muttered. A buzzer sounded. The heavy steel gate rolled back. Marcus let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for a year. He waved the van forward. Slick M.M. whispered as they rolled past the guard booth. "Kid's got ice in his veins." "He's a cop," Dragon said, a hint of pride in his gravelly voice. "Lying to idiots is half the job." The belly of the beast. They parked in the loading dock. The team moved with practiced efficiency. Butcher and M.M. swept the hallway, silencers raised. Frenchie went for the security panel to loop the cameras. Dragon stayed in the rear, crouching to fit through the pristine white corridors. The facility didn't look like a prison. It looked like a spa. Soft, ambient music played. The air smelled of lavender and antiseptic. But as they descended toward the basement levels, the decor changed. The carpet was replaced by linoleum. The motivational posters were replaced by biohazard warnings. They reached a heavy security door labeled Archive Containment. Frenchie worked his magic on the keypad. The light turned green. The door hissed open. What they found inside wasn't a server room. It was a hallway lined with glass cells, and inside the cells were the mistakes. Marcus stopped, his stomach churning. To his left, a man with transparent skin sat rocking in a corner, weeping silently. To his right, a woman with feathers growing out of her eyes clawed at the glass. "Jesus," Huey whispered, covering his mouth. "What is this place?" "Quality control." Butcher said, his voice devoid of emotion, though his grip on his rifle tightened. "When the compound V doesn't take right, or when the soups get too unstable for the talk show circuit, they put 'em here." Dragon walked down the center of the aisle. He looked into the cells. He didn't see monsters. He saw victims. He stopped at a large containment unit at the end of the hall. Inside, a young man was strapped to a chair. He was wearing a suit that looked like a police uniform but twisted. He had a helmet with a visor. That's Blue Hawk M.M. said. "I thought he was on patrol in Trenton." "He was," Butcher said, reading the chart attached to the door. "Says here he had a public relations breakdown. Excessive force. Vought pulled him to recondition his aggression centers." Dragon stared at the man in the chair. Blue Hawk was being subjected to some kind of strobe light therapy, his eyes forced open. "They're brainwashing him," Dragon growled, "reprogramming him." "It's what they do," Butcher said. "Now, come on. Server room is in the back." "We can't leave them," Dragon said. He didn't move. Butcher stopped. He turned slowly. "We are here for the data. We are not running a charity for broken toys. These things, half of them are dangerous psychotic killers. The other half are vegetables. You open those doors, you set off the silent alarm, and we all die." "They're prisoners," Dragon said, "without trial." "They're soups," Butcher hissed. "I'm a soup," a Dragon yelled. The sound echoed through the sterile hallway. The ambient music seemed to stop. Suddenly the lights in the hallway turned red. A siren began to wail. "Well," Frenchie said, throwing his hands up, "I think the debate is over." The door to Blue Hawk's cell hissed open. The restraints on the chair clicked unlocked. Simultaneously, the doors to all the cells popped open. "System override," a computerized voice announced. "Containment breach. Security protocols engaged. Asset liquidation authorized." Blue Hawk stood up. He shook his head, the grogginess fading instantly. He looked at the intruders. He saw Butcher. He saw the guns. Then he saw Dragon. Blue Hawk was a law and order soup. He believed in strength. He believed in crushing the weak to protect the strong. He saw a giant green monster standing in a tactical vest. "Terrorists," Blue Hawk spat, cracking his knuckles. His suit hummed with kinetic energy. "I knew they'd send you eventually." "We're not here to fight you," Dragon said, raising his hands. "We're breaking you out." "I don't need breaking out," Blue Hawk screamed. "I'm undergoing wellness recalibration. You're interrupting the process." Blue Hawk wound up and punched the air. A shockwave of condensed air pressure like a cannonball slammed into Dragon's chest. Dragon flew backward, crashing through a drywall partition and landing in the next room. "Kill them!" Blue Hawk shouted to the other released prisoners, a motley crew of confused, drugged, and angry semi-soups. "Earn your freedom, kill the intruders." Chaos erupted. The riot. "Fire at will," Butcher roared, opening up with his M4. The hallway turned into a kill box. Butcher, MM, and Frenchie formed a firing line, mowing down the aggressive test subjects, charging them. But the subjects were soups. Bullets slowed them down, but didn't stop them all. Marcus was grabbed by a woman with elongated elastic arms. She wrapped around him like a boa constrictor. "Get off," Marcus yelled, struggling for his gun. He jammed the pistol into her rubbery side and fired 3 times. She shrieked and recoiled, but didn't die. Kimiko launched herself at the woman, tearing into her with feral intensity. In the next room, Dragon stood up. He shook the dust off his shoulders. His chest plate was cracked. Blue Hawk stepped through the hole in the wall. He was smaller than Dragon, but faster. He punched the air again and again, sending invisible hammers slamming into Dragon's body. Bam, bam, bam. Dragon grunted, absorbing the hits, taking step after step forward against the barrage. "You call yourself a hero," Blue Hawk sneered, circling him. "Look at you. You're a freak, a mistake. I keep the streets safe. I break the skulls that need breaking." "You break people because you're small," Dragon rumbled, spitting out a tooth. "And you're scared." Dragon charged. Blue Hawk sidestepped fast as a whip and delivered a kinetic punch to Dragon's kidney. It would have ruptured a normal man's organs. Dragon just winced and swung his riot shield. The shield caught Blue Hawk in the chin. Clang. Blue Hawk stumbled back. Dragon didn't let up. He didn't punch. He used police grappling. He grabbed Blue Hawk's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him face first into a metal desk. "You have the right to remain silent," Dragon shouted. Blue Hawk roared and detonated a kinetic blast from his own body, an omnidirectional explosion. The room disintegrated. The desk was shrapnel. Dragon was thrown into the ceiling, smashing through the drop tiles and tangled in the ductwork. He fell back down, landing heavily. Blue Hawk stood over him, panting, blood running down his nose. He picked up a heavy steel filing cabinet and raised it over his head. I am the law, Blue Hawk screamed. Bang! A single shot rang out. The filing cabinet didn't drop. Blue Hawk staggered. He looked down. A flower of red bloomed on his thigh, a perfectly placed shot in the femoral artery gap of his armor. Marcus Hayes stood in the doorway, his Glock smoking, his hand trembling, but his aim true. No, Marcus, said his voice hard. You're just a perp. Blue Hawk looked at Marcus in shock. You're a cop. You shot a soup. Dragon didn't waste the moment. He swept Blue Hawk's remaining leg. As the soupy fell, Dragon pinned him, driving his knee into Blue Hawk's back and cuffing him with a pair of oversized zip ties he'd snagged from the van. Secure, Dragon yelled. In the hallway, the gunfire had died down. Butcher and the team were surrounded by groaning bodies. They were battered, bleeding, but alive. We got the drive, Huey yelled, waving a hard drive he'd ripped from the main server during the chaos. We gotta go, reinforcements are coming. Leave him, Butcher shouted, pointing at the zip-tied Blue Hawk. He's dead weight. Dragon hauled Blue Hawk up by the scruff of his neck. Blue Hawk was pale, bleeding out from the leg wound. He's bleeding out, Dragon said. If we leave him, he dies. Good, Butcher yelled. One less fascist. Dragon looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the man he had shot. The man who represented everything Marcus used to think he wanted to be. We take him, Marcus said. We question him, and we don't let him die. Not like this. Butcher stared at them. He looked at the time. He heard the sirens approaching. You two are gonna be the death of me, Butcher growled. Fine. Throw the baggage in the van. Move. Dragon hoisted the semi-conscious Blue Hawk over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. He grabbed his dented riot shield. They sprinted for the loading dock. The escape. They burst out into the cool night air, just as Vought tactical teams rappelled from black helicopters. Go, 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 MM drove the van like a getaway driver from hell tires, smoking as they peeled out of the loading bay. Bullets pinged off the rear doors. A rocket exploded the guard booth they had just passed. Inside the van, it was a mess of heavy breathing and adrenaline. Dragon sat on the floor, pressing a towel to Blue Hawk's bleeding leg. Why? Blue Hawk wheezed, looking up at the green giant who was saving his life. Why? Because I'm a cop, Dragon said simply, and today you're my prisoner, not my kill. Marcus sat opposite them. He looked at Dragon. He looked at the chaos they had just survived. For the first time, he felt like they had actually won something. Not just a fight, but a moral victory. Butcher looked back from the passenger seat. He saw Dragon tending to the enemy. He didn't sneer. He didn't make a joke. He just watched his eyes, calculating. We got the data, Huey said, plugging the drive into his laptop. Decryption will take a while, but, guys, there's a file here marked Priority Alpha. It's not about Dragon. What is it? MM asked. Huey turned the screen so they could see. It's a manifest, Huey said, his face pale. Vought isn't just tracking breaches. They're causing them. They're trying to open a door, permanently. Dragon looked up. To where? To everywhere, Huey whispered. Dragon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. If Vought was trying to breach the multiverse, they weren't just a threat to this city. They were a threat to his home, to his son Malcolm, to everyone. We need to burn it down, Dragon said. All of it. Now you're talking my language, Butcher grinned. But as the van sped into the night, Marcus looked at the bleeding Blue Hawk and wondered, if we burn it all down, what happens to the people inside? The interrogation of Blue Hawk took place in the back of the speeding van, illuminated only by the rhythmic strobe of passing streetlights. The soupy was zip-tied to a roll bar, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead, as the pain from his leg wound pulsed in time with the vehicle's suspension. Dragon sat opposite him, filling the cramped space like a brooding gargoyle. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't hitting, He was simply staring, his unblinking reptilian eyes locked onto the prisoner. It was a police tactic. The silence was louder than any threat. "I don't know the codes," Blue Hawk stammered, his bravado from the facility replaced by the shivering reality of shock. "I'm just talent. I do the patrols, I do the spots on VNN. They don't tell me about the science crap." "You were in the containment wing," Dragon said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "You weren't just a patient, you were guarding something before they put you in the chair. What was it?" I don't." Butcher leaned back from the front seat, a combat knife spinning idly in his hand. "Cut his other leg, Dragon. See if his memory is stored in his hamstrings." "No," Blue Hawk yelped. Okay, it wasn't a what, it was a where. I was assigned to perimeter detail at the South Bronx expansion project before I got too rough with a paparazzi and they benched me. They were moving heavy equipment in at night. Lead-lined containers, the size of houses. "The Bronx," Marcus asked, looking up from the laptop where he was trying to help Huey decrypt the drive. "There's nothing in the South Bronx except the new Vought community housing project. Vought Heights. It's low-income apartments." "That's the cover," Blue Hawk whispered. "It's not just housing, the foundation. It goes down 20 stories. It's a heat sink. A massive cooling tower disguised as a tenement." "Cooling what?" Dragon asked. Blue Hawk swallowed hard. "The bridge. They call it the bridge." At that moment, Huey's laptop pinged. A red dialogue box flashed on the screen. "Decryption complete. Project Omnidor status critical. Activation T-40 minutes." Huey turned the screen around. It showed a schematic of the Vought Heights complex. It was a massive residential block home to 3,000 people. Underneath it, coiled like a parasite in the earth, was a particle accelerator aimed not at an atom, but at the fabric of reality itself. "They're not just opening a door," Huey said, his voice trembling. "They're drilling a tunnel, and they're using the building's electrical grid and the people living in it as a biometric grounding wire. If they fire that thing, the feedback loop cooks everyone in the building." Finished, his face grim. "And if they succeed," Dragon said, looking at the schematic, "they open a path for everything I've spent my life fighting to come here. Warlords, conquerors, things that eat planets." Butcher slammed the dashboard. "Right. Change of plans. We aren't going to a safe house. We're going to the Bronx." "There are families in there," Marcus said, panic rising in his chest. 3,000 people. We can't just go in guns blazing. We need to evacuate them." 40 minutes, sunshine. Butcher snapped, swerving the van onto an off-ramp, tires screeching. "We don't have time to knock on doors. We go in, we blow the machine, we save the world. Collateral damage is Vought's fault, not ours." Marcus looked at Dragon. "Dragon, tell him we have to get them out first." Dragon didn't answer immediately. He looked at the schematic. He looked at the time. He looked at the gun in Marcus's hand, a gun that felt lighter and lighter the heavier his heart got. "We do what we can," Marcus, Dragon said heavily, "but the machine stops, no matter what." The Vought Heights complex was a brutalist monolith of gray concrete and neon branding rising out of the Bronx skyline like a tombstone. "Affordable living provided by Vought," the sign over the entrance proclaimed. The courtyard was quiet. It was 2:00 a.m. Lights flickered in windows where insomniacs watched TV or parents tended to crying babies. Under their feet, deep in the bedrock, a hum began to build, a vibration that rattled the teacups on the tables on the 10th floor. The van crashed through the security gate of the underground parking garage. "Suits up," Butcher yelled. They bailed out. Dragon led the charge, his riot shield raised. Vought security contractors, heavily armed, wearing full tactical gear, were waiting by the elevator bank. Contact front. The firefight was instant and deafening. Bullets sparked off Dragon's shield. He moved like a battering ram, closing the distance and sending men flying with sweeps of his baton. He didn't kill them, but he broke bones. He shattered ribs. He incapacitated them with a brutal efficiency that spoke of a man who was done playing nice. "Elevators are locked down," Frenchie shouted, hacking the panel. "They have sealed the lower levels." "Stand back," Dragon growled. He handed the shield to MM. He walked to the reinforced steel doors of the elevator shaft. He jammed his fingers into the microscopic seam between the doors, his muscles bunched veins popping against his green skin. With a roar that shook dust from the ceiling, he pried the doors apart, stripping the gears. The shaft was empty. The cables hummed. "We jumped," Dragon said. "It's 20 stories down," Huey squeaked. "I'll catch you." Dragon grabbed Huey and Frenchie, tucking them under his arms like footballs. Take the kid. Butcher, try not to die." Dragon stepped into the void. They fell into the darkness, the wind rushing past their ears. Dragon used his feet to break against the guide rails, sparks showering down like fireworks. Screak! They landed on top of the elevator car at the bottom of the shaft with a heavy thud. Dragon absorbed the impact for the others, his knees bending deep. Hatch. Butcher blew the maintenance hatch. They dropped into the facility. It was a cavern, a massive spherical chamber carved out of the rock filled with throbbing blue light. In the center stood the bridge, a ring of spinning metal 3 stories high. Inside the ring space was warping. It looked like oil on water swirling with colors that shouldn't exist. And standing in front of it was the welcoming committee. It wasn't Homelander. He was still at the press conference. It was a creature, a biological weapon that Vought had clearly pulled from a previous soft breach and leashed. It stood 12 feet tall, a mass of chitinous armor, dripping mandibles and 4 arms ending in organic blades. "What in the bloody hell is that?" Butcher asked, pausing to admire the horror. "A Mako worm," Dragon said, his voice tight. "From the Dimension X outskirts. Vought must have captured a scout." The creature shrieked a sound that shattered glass in the control booth above. "It's guarding the core," Dragon said. "I'll handle the bug. You guys plant the charges on the stabilizers." "The stabilizers are integrated into the load-bearing columns," Marcus shouted, reading the architecture of the room. He pointed to the massive concrete pillars pulsing with blue energy. "Dragon, those pillars hold up the building. If we blow them, the whole tower comes down, the people upstairs." "We don't have a choice," Butcher yelled, unslinging his pack of C4. "Look at the ring." The swirl in the ring was opening. Through the tear, a giant burning eye was visible. Something massive was looking through. "Something's coming through," MM shouted. "It's big, bigger than Dragon." "Go," Dragon roared. "Plant the charges." Dragon charged the Mako worm. The clash was titanic. The creature was stronger than any Super Dragon had fought yet. Its blade arm slashed across Dragon's chest, carving a deep gash through his tactical vest and into his scales. Dragon grunted, grabbing the limb and snapping it like a dry twig. The creature howled and spat acid. Dragon raised his arm, taking the burn, and countered with an uppercut that would have launched a tank. While the monsters fought, the humans scrambled. Butcher and Frenchie sprinted for the pillars. Marcus stood frozen near the control console. He looked at the monitors. "Resident occupancy 2842. Structural integrity linked to core shielding." "We can't blow it," Marcus screamed into his radio. "Butcher, stop. If you blow the pillars, the Foundation liquefies. Everyone dies." "If I don't blow it, everyone everywhere dies." Butcher's voice crackled back cold and final. Planting charge 1. Marcus looked at the console. There was an emergency venting protocol. It would dump the energy, close the breach, but it required a manual override from inside the core chamber. It would expose the person doing it to lethal radiation instantly. "I can vent it," Marcus yelled. "I can vent the core. We don't have to blow the building." "It's too slow," Butcher argued. "The breach is at 90%. Dragon was wrestling the Mako worm, holding 2 of its arms while it tried to bite his face off. He heard the conversation. Marcus Dragon bellowed, straining against the alien strength. "How long?" 2 minutes. I need 2 minutes to cycle the vents." "We don't have 2 minutes, Butcher yelled. "Charge 2 set fire in the hole in 30 seconds. Dragon threw the Mako worm into the spinning energy of the portal. The creature disintegrated as it hit the event horizon, its screams cut short. Dragon turned. He looked at Butcher, who was holding the detonator. He looked at Marcus, who was typing furiously at the console, tears streaming down his face, desperate to save the families above. Dragon looked at the portal. The burning eye was getting closer. A hand the size of a bus was pushing through the fabric of reality. If that thing got through, New York was gone. If they blew the building, 3,000 poor souls in the Bronx were gone. It was the math, the terrible cold math of the job. Dragon made a noise that sounded like a sob trapped in a growl. He moved, not toward the monster, toward Marcus. Dragon grabbed Marcus by the back of his vest and ripped him away from the console. "No," Marcus screamed, flailing. "I can do it. I can save them." "Not in time, kid," Dragon said, his voice breaking. "Not in time." Dragon looked at Butcher. He nodded. "No," Marcus wailed, striking Dragon's chest with his fists. "Don't you dare, you're a hero. You save people." "I'm a cop," Dragon whispered, holding Marcus tight against his chest, shielding him with his body. "And sometimes the job is just picking who dies." Dragon looked at Butcher. "Do it." Butcher pressed the button. Boom! The 4 massive pillars detonated simultaneously. The sound was the end of the world. The ceiling of the cavern, the foundation of Vought Heights, cracked open. The millions of tons of concrete steel and human lives above lost their fight with gravity. The portal destabilized. The massive hand reaching through was severed as the reality tunnel collapsed. The explosion of energy was blinded by the falling debris. Dragon curled himself into a ball, wrapping his massive body around Marcus, Frenchie, and Huey. He became a living bunker. The world fell on top of them. Darkness, dust, silence. It took a long time for the sound to return. When it did, it wasn't the sound of battle. It was the sound of settling rubble, the groan of twisted metal, and faintly from high above in the ruin, the sound of sirens. Dragon pushed up. It took everything he had. He was lifting a slab of concrete the size of a tank. His back screamed, his legs trembled. He heaved the debris aside, creating a pocket of air. He coughed, spitting out gray dust. The others were alive, huddled under him, bruised, battered, terrified, but alive. Butcher scrambled out, coughing, checking his rifle. "Job done," he wheezed. "Portals closed." Marcus crawled out last. He was covered in gray ash. He looked like a ghost. He stood up on the shifting pile of rubble. He looked up. There was no ceiling. There was just the night sky, and where the apartment building had been, there was a crater, a mountain of twisted rebar and broken concrete. It was quiet, too quiet. 3,000 people gone. Marcus fell to his knees. He vomited into the dust. Dragon stood up. He was bleeding from a dozen wounds. He looked at the devastation he had authorized. He looked at the shoes of a child poking out from the rubble 20 feet away. He felt a hole open in his chest, wider and deeper than any bullet wound. He walked over to Marcus. He reached out a hand. "Don't," Marcus whispered. Marcus looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed with dust. The hero worship was gone. The hope was gone. There was only horror. "You could have waited," Marcus hissed. "You could have tried, and the world would have ended." Dragon said, his voice flat dead. "I don't care about the world," Marcus screamed, standing up and shoving Dragon. "The giant didn't budge. I cared about them. They were people, they weren't math. You're just like them, Dragon. You're just like Vought. You just trade bodies for the greater good." Dragon took the shove. He stood there, the giant monster in the ruins of the poor. "Maybe," Dragon said, "but we're alive, and the door is closed." "At what cost?" Marcus spat. He turned away, stumbling over the wreckage, walking away from the team. "Where are you going?" Kid Butcher called out, lighting a cigarette with a shaking hand. "We need to extract. Vought ops will be swarming this grave in 10 minutes. "I'm not going with you," Marcus said, not looking back. "I'm done. I'm done." Dragon watched him go. He wanted to follow. He wanted to explain, but he knew Marcus was right. Dragon looked at his hands. They were covered in dust. The dust of the building, the dust of the people. "We need to move," Butcher said, his voice unusually soft. "Dragon, let's go." Dragon looked at the severed hand of the interdimensional entity, twitching in the corner of the ruin, proof that he was right. Proof that the invasion was real. It didn't make him feel better. He turned and followed Butcher into the shadows. He had saved the world, and he had never felt more like a villain. The rain in New York didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. It fell in heavy cold sheets, drumming against the jagged ruins of what used to be the Vought Heights housing complex. Searchlights from a dozen Vought helicopters cut through the downpour, sweeping over the mountain of wet concrete and twisted steel. From a distance, the site looked like a festering wound in the city's flank. On every screen in Times Square, on every phone and every TV in the tri-state area, the face of Homelander filled the frame. He wasn't wearing his usual confident smirk. He was weeping. They were families. Homelander choked out his voice, trembling with a performance so perfect it was indistinguishable from reality. He stood in the rain at the edge of the crater, holding a muddy teddy bear. Good, hard-working Americans. And this thing, this dragon. He didn't just attack a building. He attacked our heart. He attacked our future. The camera zoomed in on his tear-streaked face. His eyes, usually cold blue lasers, were wet with manufactured grief. "I promise you," Homelander whispered, looking directly into the lens, "I will find him, and I will make him pay for every drop of blood spilled here tonight." The underground, the new safe house, deep in the abandoned labyrinth of the subway tunnels, deeper than they had been before the silence was suffocating. Dragon sat on the edge of a rusted platform, his feet dangling over the electrified third rail. He was staring at his hands. The gray dust of the collapsed building was still impacted under his fingernails. He couldn't get it out. The rest of the boys were scattered around the damp cavern, nursing their own ghosts. Huey was curled in a sleeping bag, staring blankly at the ceiling. Frenchie was nervously dismantling and reassembling his grenade launcher. M.M. was pacing, muttering a prayer under his breath. "Stop watching it," Butcher growled. Dragon didn't look up. He was watching a portable TV set perched on a crate. It was broadcasting the recovery efforts. "Death toll rises to 3,200, the Chiron read. "No survivors found in lower levels." "They're calling it the Green Friday Massacre," Dragon said, his voice hollow. "They're saying I planted the bombs to cripple the city's infrastructure. They're not mentioning the portal. They're not mentioning the invasion." "Of course they ain't," Butcher said, cracking a can of warm beer. "That's the Vought way. Privatize the victory, socialize the tragedy. You saved the planet, mate, and for your trouble, you're the new Hitler. Dragon finally looked at Butcher. The giant's eyes were haunted. I killed 3,000 people, Butcher. That's not a spin, that's a fact. You killed 3,000 to save 8 billion. Butcher shot back, his voice hard. It's math. Bloody awful math, but math nonetheless. If that hand had come through, if the invasion started, we'd be looking at 3 billion dead by Tuesday. It doesn't feel like math, Dragon whispered. It feels like murder. It is murder, a voice said from the shadows. Blue Hawk, still zip-tied and leaning against a dripping wall, spoke up. His leg was bandaged, but he looked pale and feverish. You're a killer, Dragon. You can tell yourself whatever story you want. But I saw you. You chose to push the button. You're not a cop. You're a monster, just like they say. Dragon stood up. He walked over to Blue Hawk. The soup flinched, expecting a blow. Dragon knelt down. He checked the bandage on Blue Hawk's leg. He adjusted it gently. You're right, Dragon said softly. I am. He stood up and turned to the group. I can't stay here. The heat is too much. They'll tear the city apart looking for me. If I stay with you, you're all dead. And go where MM asked. You stick out like a sore thumb, D. There's nowhere to hide. I'm not going to hide, Dragon said, picking up his riot shield. The Vought logo on the front was scratched and scorched. I'm going to draw their fire. I'm going to make so much noise that they have to focus on me. It'll give you time to expose the data, to show the world the truth. The truth doesn't matter anymore, Huey said, sitting up. His voice was brittle. Look at the news. People are burning green effigies in the street. They hate you. Even if we release the files, they'll just think it's deep fake terrorist propaganda. Then I'll give them a villain, Dragon said grimly. If they need a monster to unite against, I'll be the monster. The dive bar, Hell's Kitchen. Marcus Hayes was drunk. Not the fun kind of drunk. The kind of drunk that was an anesthesia against the screaming in his head. He sat in a booth at the back of McSorley's, a dive bar that smelled of sawdust and regret. A shot of whiskey sat before him, amber and uninviting. On the TV above the bar, the news cycle continued. Sources say the rogue officer Marcus Hayes is considered an accomplice, armed and dangerous. Marcus laughed. A bitter, jagged sound. He wasn't armed. He'd thrown his gun into the Hudson River an hour ago. He wasn't dangerous. He was broken. Rough night. Marcus didn't look up. Read the room, pal. Piss off. It looks like a rough night, the voice persisted. It was calm, cultured, and terrifyingly precise, especially for a man who just lost his career, his reputation, and his soul in a single evening. Marcus looked up. Sitting across from him was a man in an immaculate charcoal suit. He was older, African-American, with eyes that looked like they had seen empires rise and fall and found them all mildly disappointing. Stan Edgar Marcus breathed, the CEO of Vought International, the man behind the curtain. Mr. Hayes, Edgar said, folding his hands on the sticky table. You look terrible. I know what you did, Marcus slurred, trying to focus. The portal, the Bronx. It was you. You built it. We built a renewable energy initiator, Edgar corrected smoothly. A way to solve the world's power crisis. Tragically, it was sabotaged by an interdimensional eco-terrorist. A tragedy. That's a lie, Marcus hissed. I saw the hand. I saw the thing coming through. Did you? Edgar tilted his head. Or were you hallucinating from the stress? Or perhaps the gas leaks? Edgar signaled to the bartender, who immediately placed a bottle of premium scotch on the table and walked away. Here is the reality, Marcus, Edgar said, pouring 2 glasses. Right now, you are a fugitive. You are the man who helped the butcher kill 3,000 poor souls. The NYPD has a shoot-to-kill order on you. Your life effectively is over." Marcus stared at the scotch. "So what, you here to kill me yourself?" On the contrary, Edgar smiled thinly. "I'm here to offer you redemption." Edgar slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside that envelope is a script, a sworn deposition. It says that you were kidnapped by Dragon, that you were forced to bypass the security protocols at gunpoint, that you tried to stop him but he overpowered you and detonated the Foundation out of sheer malice. Marcus looked at the envelope. "You want me to lie?" "I want you to provide context," Edgar said. "If you sign this, you are a hero, the brave officer who survived the monster. We will reinstate you, promote you. You'll be the face of the new Vought security initiative. We'll give you a platform. You can help the families of the victims. You can actually do some good." "And if I don't?" Edgar took a sip of his scotch. "Then you remain the accomplice, and eventually Homelander will find you. And I think we both know that Homelander is less conversational than I am." Marcus looked at the envelope. He thought about Dragon, the way the giant had held the fire escape, the way he had shielded him from the explosion, the way he had looked when he made the choice. "I'm a cop, and sometimes the job is just picking who dies." Marcus hated Dragon for that choice. He hated him for being right, and he hated him for making Marcus a part of it. "He saved the world," Marcus whispered. "He saved nothing," Edgar said coldly. "He destroyed an asset. He cost us billions, and he killed your constituents. Do you really owe him your loyalty, a monster you met yesterday?" Marcus reached out. His hand trembled. He touched the envelope. He thought about the dead kids in the rubble. He thought about the fact that nobody would ever know the truth. If he signed this, he could at least punish the man who pushed the button. "I want to see him burn," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "Sign the paper, Mr. Hayes," Edgar said softly, "and we will give you the match." The confrontation. Dragon stood on the roof of the Empire State Building. It was a cliché, maybe, but he needed height. He needed to be seen. The rain lashed against his skin. He held his shield in one hand and the stun baton in the other. He looked out over the city, a city of lights, unaware of how close it had come to darkness. He roared. It wasn't a word, it was a challenge, a sonic boom that echoed off the skyscrapers, shaking the glass of the observation deck. He waited. It didn't take long. The wind changed. The rain seemed to shy away. A figure descended from the clouds, cape fluttering in the gale. Homelander. He hovered 20 feet away, his arms crossed, his eyes glowing red. He looked perfect, untouchable. "You're loud," Homelander said, his voice bored, "for a dead man." "I'm not hiding," Dragon rumbled. "Come and get me." Homelander laughed. "You think this is a fight? You're a biological anomaly. I'm a god." "You're a product," Dragon said, "and your warranty just expired." Homelander's smile vanished. "I'm going to pull your fins off one by one." But before Homelander could move, 3 more figures landed on the roof. Queen Maeve looking reluctant but sword drawn. A train vibrating with speed. The Deep looking unsure of why he was there. The whole circus, Dragon grunted. He tightened his grip on the shield. Then the elevator door to the observation deck dinged. A squad of Vought tactical troopers burst out, weapons raised, and leading them was Marcus Hayes. Marcus was wearing a pristine Vought tactical uniform. He wasn't holding a Glock anymore. He was holding a high-tech energy rifle. Dragon looked at Marcus. He saw the uniform. He saw the cold, dead look in the kid's eyes. "Marcus," Dragon said. "Officer Hayes," Marcus corrected. He raised the rifle, aiming it directly at Dragon's chest. "He's all yours," Homelander, Marcus shouted over the wind. The terrorist is contained. Homelander smirked. He floated down landing next to Marcus. He put a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of ownership. Good work, Patriot, Homelander said. He looked at Dragon. See, even your pet knows you're the bad guy. Dragon looked at Marcus. He didn't see betrayal. He saw pain. He saw a man who had been broken by an impossible choice and reshaped by a master manipulator. I'm sorry, kid, Dragon said softly. I really am. Save it, Marcus spat. You made your choice, I made mine. Kill him, Homelander ordered. The seven charged. Dragon didn't retreat. He didn't apologize. He slammed his visor down. Bring it on. The brawl. It was 4 against 1 plus a squad of shooters. A-Train was the first in. He was a blur. Wham! Dragon took a hit to the ribs before he could even blink. Wham! Another to the kidney. Dragon timed it. He couldn't see A-Train, but he could hear the displacement of air. Snap! Dragon lashed out blindly with his tail, a massive muscular appendage he rarely used. It caught A-Train in the legs mid-stride. The speedster tumbled crashing into a ventilation unit at 300 miles per hour. He crumpled, screaming about his leg. One down, Dragon yelled. The deep tried to summon something. There was no water here. He charged with a knife. Dragon backhanded him without looking, sending him flying off the roof. He'd survive the fall. Probably. Queen Maeve was different. She hit hard. She stepped in, blocking Dragon's baton with her bracers, and delivered a punch that cracked Dragon's jaw. They traded blows, heavy seismic impacts that cratered the roof. Dragon was stronger than he looked, but Maeve was Wonder Woman class. She was winning. Then Homelander got bored. Zoom! Laser vision. 2 beams of concentrated heat slammed into Dragon's chest. Dragon raised his riot shield. The Vought alloy plating held for a second, glowing cherry red, then melted. The beams cut through, searing into Dragon's flesh. Dragon roared in agony, dropping to one knee. Smoke poured from his chest. Homelander floated forward, landing in front of the kneeling giant. He grabbed Dragon by the fin on his head and yanked his face up. Pathetic, Homelander sneered. You thought you could save them. You can't even save yourself. Homelander raised a fist to deliver the killing blow. Wait, Marcus Hayes stepped forward. He lowered his rifle. Let me do it, Marcus said. He ruined my life. I want the kill. Homelander paused. He looked at Marcus. He liked this, the corruption of the innocent. It was his favorite flavor. Be my guest, Homelander smiled, stepping back. Make it hurt. Marcus walked up to Dragon. He placed the muzzle of the energy rifle against Dragon's forehead. Dragon looked up. His eyes were swimming with pain, but they were clear. He looked at Marcus. Do what you have to do, Marcus, Dragon rasped. I forgive you. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle whined as it charged. He looked into Dragon's eyes. He looked at the monster who had saved the cabbie. The monster who had saved him in the tunnel. The monster who had cried when he blew the building. Marcus looked at Homelander, preening in the background. You're right, Marcus whispered. I have to do this. Marcus spun around. He didn't shoot Homelander. He knew it wouldn't work. He shot the generator for the building's spire lights, a massive bank of capacitors directly behind Homelander. Kaboom! The generator exploded in a shower of sparks and coolant. The blast caught Homelander off guard, blinding him with an arc of high-voltage electricity and steam. Run! Marcus screamed, grabbing Dragon's arm. Jump! Dragon didn't hesitate. He grabbed Marcus, pulled him close, and threw them both off the side of the Empire State Building. They fell. Gravity took hold. Are you crazy? Dragon roared as they plummeted past the 80th floor. You signed the deal. I lied, Marcus yelled back, clinging to Dragon's vest. I'm a cop. Lying to idiots is half the job. Homelander burst through the smoke above them, screaming in rage, his eyes glowing like twin suns. He dove after them, a red streak of death. "He's coming," Marcus shrieked. Dragon twisted in midair. He looked at the approaching ground. He looked at the approaching god. "Hold on tight," Dragon growled. He extended his arms and legs, creating drag, aiming for the glass atrium of the office building across the street. They crashed through the skylight in a shower of glass and steel. The 44th floor of the Vought Omnicorp building was an open-plan hellscape of ergonomic chairs, ficus plants, and motivational posters. Now it was a killing field. Dragon lay amidst the shattered remains of the atrium skylight, a cascade of safety glass covering him like diamonds. He groaned, the sound wet and deep. His regeneration was working overtime, steam rising from his scorched chest, where Homelander's lasers had carved their initials. But the fall had dislocated his hip and snapped 3 ribs. Marcus Hayes was coughing in a pile of drywall dust a few feet away. He was alive, miraculously cushioned by Dragon's massive bulk during the impact. "You okay, kid?" Dragon wheezed, popping his hip back into the socket with a sickening crunch that made Marcus wince. I just jumped off a building." Marcus stammered, his eyes wide, adrenaline vibrating through his hands. "I just jumped off a building." "Technically, I threw you." Dragon grunted, rolling to his feet. He swayed, steadying himself on a cubicle wall. "And we're not done falling yet." The ceiling above them turned molten orange. A beam of red heat sliced through the concrete slab like a hot knife through butter, describing a perfect circle 10 feet in diameter. The circle of concrete dropped, pulverizing a row of photocopiers. Homelander floated down through the hole. He didn't look like a hero anymore. His hair was mussed. His cape was torn. His face was a mask of twitching, infantile rage. He touched down on the gray carpet, his boots making no sound. "Hide and seek," Homelander cooed. The playfulness in his voice was more terrifying than the screaming. "I love this game, but I usually play it with people who can fly." Dragon grabbed Marcus by the collar of his tactical vest and shoved him toward the emergency stairwell. "Go," Dragon whispered. "Down. Don't stop." "I'm not leaving you," Marcus hissed. "You can't fight him, Marcus. You're just a battery for his ego right now. Go." Dragon turned and grabbed a heavy oak conference table. He roared and hurled it across the room. Homelander didn't even blink. He swatted the table aside with the back of his hand, splintering it into toothpicks. "It's rude to throw furniture," Homelander said, his eyes glowing. Dragon charged. He didn't have a plan. He just had mass and momentum. He tackled Homelander, driving him back through a glass partition and into the executive break room. It was like tackling a statue bolted to the core of the earth. Homelander slid back a few feet, his boots carving tracks in the floor, but he didn't fall. He looked down at Dragon, who was grappling him around the waist. "Is that it?" Homelander asked, genuinely disappointed. "I thought you were a monster." Homelander brought his clasped hands down on Dragon's back. Crack! The floor collapsed. Dragon fell through to the 43rd floor. He hit a desk, smashed through it, and rolled, gasping. His spine felt like it had been compressed into a diamond. Homelander drifted down through the hole, hovering just out of reach. "You're durable." "I'll give you that," Homelander mused, examining his fingernails. "Most people pop like water balloons. You're more like a stress ball, fun to squeeze." V&N Broadcast Tower, Times Square. "Are we live?" "Tell me we're live," Billy Butcher screamed, holding an assault rifle on the terrified technical director of the V&N control room. I can't just interrupt the feed," the director stammered. "The encryption key changes every 10 seconds. Only Vought Tower can override the signal. Move over, a voice said. Annie January Starlight stepped forward. She wasn't wearing her costume. She was wearing jeans and a hoodie, her eyes determined. Annie Huey gasped from the doorway where he was barricading the entrance with MM. What are you doing here? I'm done with the script, Huey, she said, her hands glowing with white light. She placed her palms on the mixing console. I can't hack the code, but I can fry the lockout chip. She surged energy into the board. Sparks flew, monitors blew out. The director screamed and dove under his desk. Signal is open, Frenchie yelled furiously, typing on his laptop connected to the main server. Uploading the Wellness Center drive. Now the Bronx files. The emails from Edgar Everything. Make it wide, Butcher growled. Every screen, every phone, every billboard. I want them to see what their safety really costs. The 43rd floor. Dragon was tired. Not the tired of a long shift. The tired of a lifetime of fighting battles that weren't his. He stood up, blood pouring from a gash in his forehead, blinding his left eye. Homelander walked toward him casually, kicking over office chairs. Why do you care? Homelander asked, tilting his head. You're not from here. You're a freak, like me. Why are you dying for them? They hate you. They threw bottles at you. They're scared, Dragon spat, wiping the blood from his eye. There's a difference. No, Homelander said, stopping inches from Dragon. There isn't. They're mud. We are the gods who walk on them. You could have been useful, Dragon. We could have run this city, but you chose to be a cop. Homelander reached out and poked Dragon's chest. It was a tap, but it felt like a hammer. You're boring. Homelander wound up a punch, a haymaker, a punch meant to take a head off. Dragon didn't block. He slipped inside the guard. He used his lower center of gravity. He grabbed Homelander's cape and his belt. I'm not a god, Dragon growled, his voice a rumble of tectonic plates. I'm a public servant. Dragon twisted his hips and executed a perfect judo throw. It shouldn't have worked. Homelander could lift airplanes, but physics was physics. Homelander was off balance, overconfident and floating. Dragon slammed Homelander into the floor, hard. For the first time, Homelander looked surprised. Dragon didn't stop. He mounted Homelander and started pounding, left, right, left, right. Thud, 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 thud. Dragon's fists were like sledgehammers. He felt Homelander's nose break under the third blow. A spray of blood-red human blood spattered onto Dragon's green fists. You bleed, Dragon roared. You bleed like anyone else. Homelander shrieked. It wasn't a battle cry. It was the scream of a child who had been told no for the first time in 40 years. His eyes flared red. Z-Z-Z-Z-Z-A-K. A point-blank blast of heat vision caught Dragon in the face. Dragon flew backward, crashing through the window and hanging precariously off the ledge of the skyscraper, 40 stories up. His face was a ruin of smoking scales. He was blind. He was burning. Homelander stood up. He touched his bleeding nose. He looked at the blood on his fingers. He began to tremble. You, Homelander whispered, his voice shaking with a quiet, lethal insanity. You ruined my face. He walked toward the window. He wasn't going to just kill Dragon. He was going to disassemble him. Times Square. The giant screens surrounding the intersection, usually playing ads for Vought pharmaceuticals and A-Train energy drinks, flickered black. The crowd, huddled under umbrellas in the rain, looked up in confusion. Then the static cleared. A video played. It was shaky handheld footage from a body cam. It showed the glowing blue portal in the Bronx basement. It showed the alien hand reaching through. Audio, if I don't blow it, everyone everywhere dies, Butcher's voice. Audio, I can vent it, I can save them, Marcus's voice. Audio, not in time, kid. Not in time, Dragon's voice. Then the screen changed to a document. An email from Stan Edgar to the Department of Defense. Subject: Project Omnidor, acceptable losses text. The Bronx facility is a calculated risk. If the heat sink fails, the casualty projection is 3,000 to 5,000 low-income residents. This is within the margin of error for Phase 2 testing. Proceed. The crowd in Times Square went silent. Then another video. Homelander at the press conference holding the teddy bear. Split-screen Homelander in the green room seconds before the press conference captured on a hot mic. Homelander video, get this dirt off me. God, this bear smells like poor people. How long do I have to pretend to cry? And the silence in Times Square broke. It started as a murmur, then a shout, then a roar. A bottle flew at the screen, then a brick. Liar, someone screamed. Murderer. The 44th floor. Homelander grabbed Dragon by the throat, lifting him off the ledge, dangling him over the city. Look at them. Homelander hissed, his eyes burning into Dragon's charred face. Look at the ants. They're waiting for me to drop you. They want to see the splat. Dragon cracked his one good eye open. He looked down at the streets. He smiled. A bloody, broken, gruesome smile. I don't think that's what they're looking at, Dragon wheezed. Homelander frowned. He looked down. He saw the screens. He saw his own face mocking the victims. He saw the email. He heard the sound rising from the street. It wasn't applause. It was hate. Pure, unadulterated hate. Homelander's heart skipped a beat. His ratings, his love, his milk. It was curdling. No, Homelander whispered. No, no, no. That's fake. That's fake news. He looked back at Dragon. You did this. The truth did this, Dragon said. Homelander screamed. He threw Dragon. He didn't throw him down. He threw him up. He threw Dragon toward the helicopter circling above. Then Homelander took off, breaking the sound barrier, flying straight up to intercept the falling giant. He was going to punch Dragon into orbit. He was going to leave the planet. He was going to burn the sky. Dragon tumbled in the air, helpless. He saw the red blur coming for him. This is it, Dragon thought. Malcolm, I'm sorry. Suddenly, a streak of white lightning intercepted the red blur. Crash. Starlight hit Homelander in midair. She didn't stop him. He was too heavy, too strong, but she knocked him off course. Then a black shape slammed into Homelander's back. Queen Maeve. She had seen the screens. She had seen the email. She had seen enough. Maeve Homelander screamed, spinning in the air. You traitor! Shut up, John, Maeve shouted, driving her sword into the gaps of his armor. Dragon began to fall back toward the roof. He crashed onto the 44th floor, again cracking the slab. He couldn't move. His regeneration was failing. He was out of energy. He lay on his back, watching the battle in the sky. Flashes of red, white, and gold light illuminated the clouds. The gods were warring. The elevator doors pinged. Dragon tensed, trying to find his baton, but his hands wouldn't work. Marcus Hayes stepped out. He wasn't alone. Behind him were a dozen NYPD officers, regular cops, beat cops, ESU tactical teams. They had their guns drawn. They looked at Dragon, the monster, the green giant bleeding out on the carpet. Marcus stepped forward. He knelt beside Dragon. Freeze, an ESU sergeant yelled, aiming his rifle at Dragon. Marcus stood up. He turned to face the sergeant. He pointed at the window, at the battle in the sky, at the screens below. He's not the perp, Sarge Marcus said, his voice steady. He's the partner. The sergeant looked at the screens. He looked at Homelander trying to murder Starlight. He looked at the email about acceptable losses in the Bronx, his own precinct. The sergeant lowered his rifle. Medical, the sergeant shouted into his radio. We have an officer down 44th floor. I repeat, officer down. Dragon let his head fall back against the carpet. The darkness was creeping in at the edges of his vision. Officer Down Dragon whispered the words, tasting strange and wonderful. The sky. Homelander was overwhelmed. Not physically, he could kill Maeve and Starlight if he really let loose, but psychologically. The noise from the street was deafening. The internet was flooding with memes of his poor people comment. The illusion was shattered. He backhanded Maeve, sending her crashing into a billboard. He blasted Starlight, knocking her out of the sky. He hovered alone in the rain, panting. He looked down at the city. He could burn it all. He could laser every man, woman, and child in Times Square. But then there would be no one left to love him. He looked at Vought Tower, his home, his throne. It was dark. Edgar had cut the lights. Homelander felt a tear roll down his cheek, a real one this time. "You don't deserve me," he whispered. He looked up at the stars. And then with a sonic boom that shattered windows for 10 blocks, Homelander flew up. He didn't stop. He broke the atmosphere. He kept going. He ran away. The aftermath. The paramedics were wary. They had never treated a 7-foot lizard man before. "His skin is too thick for the needle," a medic said, panic in her voice. "I can't get the morphine in." "Go through the mouth," Marcus said, holding Dragon's hand. "Under the tongue. Soft tissue." Dragon opened his eyes. They were hazy. "Did we get him?" Dragon rasped. "He ran," Marcus said, smiling through his own tears. "You made him run, Dragon. You broke him." Good, Dragon sighed. "Paperwork is gonna be a bitch." Dragon closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. The green chest stopped heaving. Dragon Marcus shook him. "Dragon, stay with me." "He's crashing," the medic yelled. "Get the paddles charged to 300. "That won't work." Frenchie burst out of the stairwell holding a syringe filled with a glowing blue liquid. "His physiology is amphibious. Electricity will stop his heart completely. Give him this compound V agonist. It will jumpstart his healing factor." The medic hesitated. "Do it," Marcus screamed. Frenchie jammed the syringe into Dragon's neck. Nothing happened for a second. Then Dragon's eyes snapped open. The pupils were slits. He gasped a sound like a vacuum seal breaking. The wounds on his chest began to knit together, visibly steam, whistling from the closing lacerations. He sat up, ripping the IV lines out. He looked around wildly. "Easy, big guy," Marcus said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Easy. The fight's over." Dragon looked at Marcus. He looked at the cops standing around him, not with guns raised, but with respect. He looked at the medic, who was trembling but holding a bandage. Dragon slumped back against the wall. "I'm hungry," Dragon rumbled. "I know a place," Marcus laughed, wiping his face. "Best shawarma in the city." "Do they serve vast quantities?" "We'll buy the cart." Dragon nodded. He looked out the broken window at the rain-slicked city. It was still broken. Vought was still there. The world was still messy. But the fear was gone. Officer Hayes, Dragon said. "Yeah, partner. You have the right to remain, my friend." Marcus smiled. "I think I can live with that." Butcher watched from the shadows of the hallway, leaning against a vending machine. He lit a cigarette despite the no smoking sign. "Don't get too cozy, lads," Butcher muttered to himself. "Homelander's gone, but nature abhors a vacuum, and I reckon something worse is going to try to fill that seat." He checked his phone. A text from an unknown number. Text: "The portal is closed, but the door is unlocked. They know we are here." Butcher crushed the cigarette under his boot. "Right then," he said, racking his rifle, "on to the sequel." The snow in New York didn't stay white for long. It turned into gray slush within minutes of hitting the pavement. But for a few seconds, as it fell over the new Memorial Park in the Bronx, it was pristine. 6 months had passed since the Green Friday event. The crater where the Vought Heights Tower once stood had been filled in not with concrete, but with earth. 3,000 saplings were planted there, one for every life lost when the foundation was blown. Marcus Hayes stood at the edge of the park, the collar of his new trench coat turned up against the biting wind. He wasn't Officer Hayes anymore. The gold shield on his belt read, Captain. He held 2 coffees, one regular, one in a thermos the size of a fire extinguisher. "It's quiet," a voice rumbled from behind him. Dragon stepped up beside Marcus. The ground shook slightly with his footfalls. He was wearing a custom-tailored NYPD overcoat, size XXXXXL, with the sleeves ripped off to accommodate his massive scaled arms. A modified heavy-duty badge was pinned directly into the Kevlar weave of his vest. "It's a graveyard dragon," Marcus said softly, handing over the thermos. "It's supposed to be quiet." Dragon took the coffee. He looked out at the trees. He didn't see saplings. He saw the faces of the people he hadn't saved. That weight hadn't left him. It never would. It was the gravity that kept him grounded in a world of flying narcissists. "Vought stock is up 4 points today," Dragon noted, his voice devoid of surprise. "Stan Edgar testified before Congress," Marcus replied, sipping his coffee. "Claimed Homelander was a rogue biological asset and that Vought International had been the victim of corporate espionage. He even thanked the NYPD for assisting in the cleanup." He spun it. He always spins it. "He can spin it all he wants," Dragon grunted. "Homelander is gone. The 7 are in disarray. Starlight and Maeve are running their own show now. The fear is broken." "For now," Marcus said. He turned to look at his partner. The green skin was still shocking to tourists, but to New Yorkers, Dragon had become a fixture, a landmark. The cop. "You know, Butcher sent a card," Marcus added. Dragon raised a brow ridge. "A card, Hallmark?" "A cocktail napkin. It just said, 'Don't screw it up.' And it was wrapped around a grenade pin." Dragon chuckled, a sound like a diesel engine idling. Sentimental. A crackle of static broke the silence. The radio on Marcus's shoulder chirped. "Dispatch to Alpha 1. We have a 1031 in progress at the Federal Reserve. Suspect is identified as a guy made of literal lava. He's melting the vault door. SWAT is requesting the heavy option." Marcus pressed the talk button. "Alpha 1 to dispatch. We're 10 minutes out. Tell SWAT to pull back and set a perimeter. Do not engage with small arms. You'll just make him mad." He released the button and looked at Dragon. "Lava guy," Marcus sighed. "I miss purse snatchers." "Heat is good for my joints," Dragon said, cracking his knuckles. The sound echoed like pistol shots. "Cold weather makes me sluggish." They walked toward the heavy-duty reinforced tactical truck parked at the curb. It was painted NYPD blue and white, but the suspension was built for a tank. "You know," Marcus said, opening the driver's side door, "before you showed up, I was ready to quit. I thought the badge was a joke. I thought we were just janitors for the gods." Dragon paused, his hand on the roll bar of the truck bed. He preferred riding in the back. The cab was too cramped. "And now," Dragon asked. Marcus looked at the badge on his chest. He looked at the memorial park. He thought about the choice in the basement, the terrible, impossible choice. "Now," Marcus said, his eyes clear and sharp, "now I know the difference between a god and a cop. Which is, a god expects to be worshipped." Marcus smiled, starting the engine. "A cop expects to get his hands dirty." Dragon grinned, his fin catching the winter sun. He vaulted into the back of the truck, the suspension groaning under his half-ton weight. He pulled his dented, scorched riot shield from the rack. "Let's go get dirty, partner." Vought Tower, penthouse office. High above the city, Stan Edgar watched the feed from a traffic camera. He watched the NYPD truck weave through traffic sirens wailing. He watched the green giant in the back waving to a group of awe-struck kids on a corner. Edgar took a sip of water. He turned his chair away from the window. On his desk was a holographic display. It showed a DNA sequence, a double helix that was partially human, partially reptilian, and partially something unknown to Earth science. The file name read, Project Kerr, Replication Phase 1. The public loves a hero, Edgar murmured to the empty room, but they buy more merchandise when there's a villain. He pressed a button on his intercom. Dr. Vogelbaum, is the sample viable? Yes, Mr. Edgar, a voice crackled back. The regenerative properties are extraordinary. If we splice this with the compound V derivative, we won't just make a soldier boy, we'll make an army of dragons. Excellent, Edgar said, his face impassive. Begin the trials, and paint them red. Focus groups say red is more aggressive. He cut the connection. Edgar looked back at the window at the city stretching out to the horizon. Welcome to the Force, Lieutenant Dragon, Edgar whispered. Enjoy your shift. The night is just beginning. The street. The truck tore down Fifth Avenue. Dragon stood tall in the bed of the truck, the wind whipping his coat. He felt the rhythm of the city beneath his feet. It was a messy, violent, corrupt, beautiful city. It wasn't Chicago. It wasn't his dimension. But as the siren wailed and the people stepped aside to let them pass, not out of fear, but out of respect, Dragon realized something. He wasn't a monster here. He wasn't an alien. He was the law, and God help anyone who broke it.